At just over 1,300 pages, the epic 1Q84 by Japanese author Haruki Murakami is by far his longest work. It's a massive, mind-bending tale spanning the course of 3 novels, with multiple character perspectives, thought-provoking themes, questions and ideas, and intertwining narrative threads. To say it covers a lot of ground would be a massive understatement. But one common criticism that pops up frequently in discussions is that a lot of readers walk away feeling as if they have more questions than answers. And that's largely to do with the somewhat ambiguous and open-ended climax to the trilogy, which leaves a lot of the characters' fates and the narrative threads hanging in midair, much like the air chrysalises which the mysterious little people make. Which begs the question, why do so many people walk away from 1Q84 feeling like there's something unfinished and something missing from the story? Well, what if I told you it's because there is? What if I told you that 1Q84 isn't finished yet and there might still be more to come? Hello everyone, welcome to Between the Lines Books and Films. My name is Dylan, and I'm here to share my passion for storytelling with you by exploring iconic books, films, and other media that I'm interested in. I recently finished my 4th read-through of 1Q84, and I really enjoyed it. Well, I must have done because I've read it 4 times now. And I noticed a lot of really interesting threads and points that were kind of subtle and I didn't pick up on my first few readings, which I'll come back to in future videos. But the biggest thing that caught my attention was something actually outside of the book entirely. It was a crucial piece of information about the world of 1Q84, the characters, and the story that somehow I had missed entirely up until this point. In a New Yorker interview published in February 2019, when asked about his ambiguous and mysterious qualities to his stories, Haruki Murakami had this to say: "When I publish a book of fiction, sometimes friends call me and ask, 'What happens next?' I say, 'That's the end of it.' But people expect a sequel. After I published 1Q84, I understood everything that would happen next. I could have written a sequel, but I didn't. I thought it might feel like Jurassic Park 4 or Die Hard 8. So I kept that story in my mind only, and I enjoyed it very much. The protagonist of the sequel is Tango's daughter at age 16. It's a very interesting story, and there is a prequel to that book." That was pretty mind-blowing to me. The fact that after 1,300 pages and 3 novels, Murakami still has more he wants to tell in the world of 1Q84. Not just in one sequel book, but in a prequel book as well. And I'm so curious to find out what happens next in the story of 1Q84, and in between what happens next in the prequel. And I have a few thoughts, I have a few observations, and ideas of where it could potentially go. But before I start, this will dive into spoiler territory, so if you haven't read 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, what are you doing? Why are you here? You probably won't understand anything that I'm about to talk about. And to be honest, even if you have read 1Q84, you still might struggle a little bit to understand what's going on, because even I do, and I've read it 4 times. So there's this revelation: Murakami has another installment of 1Q84 planned in his mind only. Very mysterious, very vague, and a prequel as well. But in typical Murakami fashion, he's very vague. He doesn't really delve too deeply into exactly what he has in mind, which makes it quite mysterious and a bit of a puzzle. But there was one crucial detail in what Murakami did reveal that I found incredibly thought-provoking and potentially insightful about exactly what 1Q84 Part 4 could look like. And that's how he revealed that the story would revolve around Tango's daughter at the age of 16. That's very precise phrasing. Notice how he doesn't include Aomame in that. It's Tango's daughter, not Tango and Aomame's daughter, which is kind of a surprising prospect, because the way that 1Q84, the trilogy, finishes off is that Tango and Aomame escape the world of 1Q84 together, and they're set to have this child together. So when I read this and I saw Tango's daughter rather than Tango and Aomame, lots of interesting ideas started popping up in my head. And this raises a lot of really interesting questions. And those questions, well, I don't have any answers to the questions, they do sort of lead to more questions, which sort of proves the basis for an interesting backdrop for a story. I feel like when you have a lot of questions to ask, it's sort of the natural environment for a story to thrive and grow. Because why would you write a story that you already know all the answers to? You want to explore, you want to come up with ideas and be curious and adventurous. And I think that's really where stories shine, when the author is exploring something that he's interested in. And that's why it's kind of sad that, Alright, let's continue. So let's go through my series of questions and we'll sort of see, is there enough material there for 1Q84 Part 4 and 1Q84 Part 3.5? It's very hard to say all these words. Alright, so is Tengo's daughter, is it the same child that he has with Aomame at the end of 1Q84, the trilogy, or is it a different child entirely? And what does that mean for Tengo and Aomame's relationship? What happened? Why is it only Tengo's kid? Did something happen between them? Are they no longer together? A lot can change over the course of 16 years, and there is the slight chance that Tengo and Aomame didn't stick together and they drifted apart somehow. But for what reason? If this did happen, why would they drift apart? Is it because of some emotional drama? Is there relationship drama? Are they having some issues at home or something? For some reason, that doesn't resonate with me. I don't think that that's really a possibility, because one sort of definitive thing that Murakami has introduced throughout 1Q84 is that Tengo and Aomame have a very 1 in a million sort of love, like a soulmate, is stars aligning sort of situation. They don't really see each other at all in the book until the end, so it's sort of like the star-crossed lovers, they're meant to be together, they're inseparable on some cosmic scale. So I don't think that's really a possibility. So if it's not relationship dramas, if something hasn't split them up on an interpersonal level, it must be an external force. And what external force could it be? Is Aomame dead? Is she missing? Or is there someone or something that is tearing them apart? Could it be the ominous Sakigake cult that is responsible for this? In 1Q84, following the death of their leader, the cult is sort of thrown into disarray and chaos, and they're kind of scrambling without their leadership, without their perceiver or receiver, I can't remember which the phrase is, who's there to listen to the little people, to interpret what they're saying and to spread the message. They're in a mess, and they need someone to fulfill that role, to fill the void, as is commonly used throughout the book. That's a phrase that gets thrown around. When something leaves this world, a void is created and it has to be filled. So I think the leader has left the cult, or he's dead, and there's this void within Sakigake. They need a new leader, they need a new interpreter, someone to listen to the little people. My gut instinct is that they would put 2 and 2 together. They would sort of figure out that Tengo and Aomame were involved in the publication of Air Chrysalis and also the death of the leader, and they're connected somehow. And I think they would also figure out that Aomame was pregnant and that Tengo and her weren't really physically together at that point. And I think given their radical nature, their belief in the little people, the leader and everything, they would probably view Tengo and Aomame's child, who is conceived without physical relations, as some sort of spiritual messiah, demigod sort of figure, and they would probably want to go and hunt them down and take the child for themselves back to the cult so they could have their new leader to worship and to be in tune with the little people. So if that was the case, if Sakigake were hunting down Tengo and Aomame, there's only a few possibilities. They're either successful, they're unsuccessful, or they're still trying. But given the fact that Murakami excluded Aomame from the description, given that he described this child, this daughter, as Tengo's daughter rather than Aomame's daughter, it kind of feels like Aomame is absent in the story, which wouldn't be the biggest surprise in a Murakami story. I mean, it's not the first time there's been a missing female character in a Murakami story. It's like, it's par for the course. It's you just expect it naturally. So that wouldn't surprise me. That kind of clicks. That makes sense. Maybe Aomame is missing, maybe she's dead. I'm not sure about their child. I don't know what happens. And it's very difficult to gauge given Murakami's incredibly vague and short descriptions, but I would presume that Sakigake would still be involved in the storyline somehow. Murakami says the story would revolve around Tengo's daughter at the age of 16, which would place us somewhere around the turn of the millennium, around 2000, 2001. And there were a lot of changes and events going on in the world that really affected the sort of public, collective unconscious, everyone's beliefs and everything, such as, 9/11 and the global unease about terrorism. And without trivializing those very serious topics, it kind of clicks, it makes sense as a thematic backdrop for a story about a radicalized cult and the progression from 1984, or 1Q84, to 16 years later, the turn of the millennium. A lot of things can change, and it wouldn't surprise me, especially given the backdrop, the timings, that Sakigake might have become more militant, they might have become more elusive, reclusive, and violent, and much more feared. So I can kind of imagine them sort of chasing after Tengo and Aomame and their child, and still continuing to be an ominous and threatening presence throughout the story. Another thing to note is that a key theme in 1Q84 is the relationship between fiction and reality, and the responsibility of narrative, and the responsibility of portraying reality through narrative as well. It's there's a lot of interesting themes. As I said, I'll come back to that in a separate video. But my point being is, even though Tengo and Aomame theoretically escaped 1Q84 at the end of the trilogy, I think they still carry some of the responsibility of the knowledge and the memories from 1Q84, the information that they have, what they know about the little people, Fukaeri, the Sakigake cult, all of that stuff. They carry some of that responsibility, particularly Tengo, who was a key figure in the publication of Air Chrysalis, given that he rewrote it along with Komatsu, and they published it and it became a huge hit. So I think he has a huge responsibility, and you know, he continued to write his own work within the same world that Fukaeri was describing, with the two moons and the little people and everything. And I think I could imagine, you know, if he escaped 1Q84 and he's in the real world, or our world now, he would probably still have some traces somehow of his writing. He would probably continue to work on his writing. He'll think he's in the clear. He thinks he's all safe. He's no longer under the threat of the cult or anything. And, you know, maybe 16 years later, his daughter discovers some of his writing, and maybe it starts to play an effect in that world as well. So they haven't escaped 1Q84 because it's something that they're essentially creating by having the knowledge and the responsibility, and what they do with that responsibility. It all sounds so pretentious and vague when I talk about it, but it feels intuitively true on a gut level. It feels like that makes sense. And I like that idea a lot. I like the idea of there being more of a personal stake to it, like Tengo's daughter. I think that's a really interesting idea. And I'm particularly interested because Murakami says the protagonist of the story is Tengo's daughter, which I presume means a lot of the story would be from her perspective. So I'm interested, you know, going into this potential sequel with the knowledge from 1Q84, and then sort of the suspense of seeing someone else discover it for the first time. That would be really interesting. So there's a lot of possibilities and potential for where this story could go, and that's really exciting. I really hope that we can read it someday. And given the fact he mentioned there would be a prequel to this sequel, that implies there's a lot of backstory and history leading up from 1Q84 in the year 1984 to 2000 or 2001. And that makes me think about the other characters left over in the world of 1Q84, such as Fukaeri, Tamaru, Komatsu, Professor Ebisuno, the Dowager, and Ushikawa. And I'll come back to Ushikawa in a second, because I know that doesn't make sense at a first glance, but I'll get to that. I've got an interesting little idea about that. So I think a prequel story would probably revolve around those characters, the ones left over, because they've probably still been left to deal with the effects of the world of 1Q84. They're not in the clear. Tenko and Aomame might be, but they still remain in that reality. And I wonder what happens to them. I wonder how it affects them. You know, Komatsu, he's a really interesting character, profiteering from the publication and fictionalization of a very real and traumatic story, which I don't think he was very responsible with. And Professor Ebisuno, who was similar, he sort of exploited the story for his own gain, and he's sort of like a vaguely threatening character. He's sort of villainous almost. Like that relationship with him and Komatsu, that would be so interesting. Something specifically about that, like those two characters would be awesome. And of course Fukaeri, what happens to her, the Dowager as well, and Tamaru, the bodyguard, security guard guy. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting ways that they could still explore the world outside of just Tengo, Aomame, and their child. So coming back to Ushikawa, who I briefly mentioned, yes, at the end of 1Q84, Ushikawa does die. He's killed by Tamaru. The same character, Ushikawa, he's also in the Wind Up Bird Chronicle as a very similar character, which also takes place in the year 1984 during a similar stretch of time. It sort of takes place between, you know, it goes until like December or whatever, which is the same time that 1Q84 goes until. So how can Ushikawa exist in two separate places at once? And why is he so similar in both instances? It must be the same character, right? So do you think Ushikawa is in the world with Tengo and Aomame and their child? Is he still a presence? I don't know, food for thought. It would be cool. He's an interesting character to read about. Horrible guy, not a good guy at all, not a role model. And although it's fun to speculate about potential storylines and future book releases, it doesn't really seem likely at this point that this is going to happen. I mean, this interview was published in 2019 in February, and since then a couple of things have happened. We've had the COVID-19 lockdown, and Murakami wrote The City and Its Uncertain Walls, which is his most recent work. And it seems like he's working on another novel as well, which he just dropped out of the blue. He's just coming up with something completely unexpected. Not a lot of details about that. I think it could be to do with some short stories he's been publishing recently in some magazines and things, which I'm excited for. I think that's going to be really cool. So I don't know about this continuation of 1Q84, if it's ever going to see the light of day, or if it's just going to stay in Murakami's mind as he says. I would absolutely love it to. I would love to continue my adventure into 1Q84. That would be a lot of fun. And I don't think it's entirely off the cards, because it's not the first time Murakami sort of continued a previous series. You know, he wrote Dance Dance Dance, which was published about 8 or 9 years after A Wild Sheep Chase, which was, you know, an unexpected continuation of the Rat trilogy, which was really cool. It was kind of like a bookend to that, no pun intended. And of course, he's also recently published The City and Its Uncertain Walls, which is a rework of a previous story that he wrote decades ago. So he's not impartial to revisiting things or continuing things. He sort of just goes with the flow. He does what he likes, and when he feels like it. So I wonder, is there a possibility we'll see any of these ideas come to fruition? Murakami himself said he's concerned that it will be like Jurassic Park 4 or Die Hard 8, and I couldn't disagree more. I think it would be the complete opposite. I think it would be a really fun and interesting way to take what we know and expand upon it and build upon it. It wouldn't be just like a meaningless sequel, like a cash grab, because clearly he's got some ideas for it and he's got some interest in it. So I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity that he's not pursuing it, as far as I'm aware. He may well be. We may see this continue very soon. Who knows? Anyway, enough of my speculation. What do you think? Would you like to see 1Q84 continue? And what sort of direction do you think it would go in? Do you think my thoughts and observations have any credibility? Can you see the story going in that direction? Let me know down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, a friendly comment, or subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.